new in the 70s. My father used to get annoyed because he would go into a store, look at all the TVs, and they were all different.
Yes.
Not so much now because they're all, the technology is better, number one. And number two, all this, there is a setting for store display,
Yeah.
and they're all pretty much the same.
They're all pushed in the store.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And what people don't understand, like you said, there is that factory setting
Yeah.
for store displays, but you're looking at it in a large open space with lots of fluorescent lights, and then you
Yeah.
take it home, it's a much darker space with maybe incandescent lights or LED lights, so
Yeah.
it's a completely different scenario. So yeah. All right. What I have in store for you guys is kind of a little bit of a continuation from something that we discussed last time. Was it last time or the time before? When I mentioned that Adobe had come out with some updates to Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, Lightroom Mobile, Adobe Camera Raw, in that they added a different or a new color color rendering setting in their hold on a second, I'm getting confused here, in their color profiles. All right, and I mentioned that they came out with two new ones. The Adobe Adaptive Color and Adobe's Adaptive Black and White. And I kind of touched on those. And since that time, I played around with them, and I've discovered that there are certain situations where those work really, really well. And there are certain situations that really don't work all that well. And one of those situations that I found out was if you do any kind of HDR bracketing. So I was tutoring a photographer on HDR photography, and how to properly bracket for an exposure that would make a good HDR set. And while I was showing them that, I said, "Oh, let me throw in this new adaptive color setting," and it totally went sideways. I found out that using the Adobe adaptive color in advance of doing the HDR doesn't work. So I wanted to cover that with you guys. Also, there are certain situations where you might want to use one of the more standard ones. And of course, the standard ones is the Adobe Color, Adobe Portrait, Adobe Landscape, and of course, the Adobe Neutral. Okay. Now, I mentioned in the past that my preference when importing an image was to import it with Adobe Neutral, in anticipation that I was going to do something further with the color on a per image basis. And I mentioned that now that the adaptive color has come out, I'm probably going to switch that around. Well, I'm starting to have second thoughts simply because of the way I shoot may or may not work. All right. So anyway, I've pulled out a bunch of images. Let me switch over to my desktop. I picked out a bunch of images. A lot of them are HDR. Oh, let me share the screen too. Share screen, share. There we go. All right. So I pulled up a bunch of HDR shots. Some of these are like really, really old. Like this one's going back all the way to 2015. I reached back, and some of these are just really horrendous. Um, just for this example. All right. So what I have here is this shot. Let me, come on, zoom out. Zoom out. What the heck? Don't want to zoom. There we go. This was taken during a very, very foggy winter day. We just had a really major low-lying fog here in the valley. And I went out with the camera and I took this shot, and I took this shot as an HDR. So there's, a light, a medium, and a dark. And as you can see, when I grabbed this, I wasn't thinking of my exposure bracket. I just kind of blindly set it. I think it's a 1 exposure difference or something like that, 1.5 exposure difference. So these are not the ideal shots, but I picked this in particular because it's not really a high contrast image. As you can see in this particular one, there's really nothing in the blacks, and there's very little in the shadows. So this would be considered a high key image. All right. And the thing is, all right, as you can see, I have this, I shot it and imported it as camera neutral. Now, this particular image doesn't have a lot of color. So picking out some of these other profiles probably not going to do me all much good, other than playing around with some of the contrast. All right. So just to kind of catch you up, the lowest amount of contrast is this one here, which is the Adobe Camera Neutral. And this is kind of like I mentioned before, if you shoot video shooting in D-Log, where everything's kind of compressed into the middle and there's not a lot of contrast, and you're able to really manipulate it in post-processing a lot more. So that was my mentality back in the day. I've since switched it up a little bit, and I've kind of went into more of the Adobe color. And as you can see, that if I switch from I can't even go back to Adobe Neutral. Where is it? Adobe Neutral. Oh, it's not in my favorites. Let me add it to my favorites. That way I can have it available here. All right. Adobe Neutral, you can see that those areas of snow, all right, in particular, what I want you to do is pay attention to this area of kind of flat gray, all right. As soon as we switch it from camera neutral to camera color, you notice that light tone gray brightens up, and it's no longer looking like a muddy mess. It's looking more like white snow and a bright fog. All right. And the trees really didn't brighten up all that much. So let me go back to camera neutral. If we look at the tonality of this tree on the left and right, and even this patch of ground that's peeking through, when I switch it over to Adobe Color, we gain some contrast, but those areas really don't shift in luminosity all that much. Okay, but where we get the contrast is because that dull gray now brightened up a little bit, increasing the difference, so it increases the contrast. Very gray. All right, we do have some color coming through, and you know, pretty much this little sliver right here, that's, and right there, that's pretty much the only color that we have going on here. Everything else is just blah. All right, and Adobe Landscape is one of those color profiles that enhances colors that would normally be found in nature. All right, the colors that you would normally find in a landscape, and that would be your browns, your greens, and of course the blues. All right, so if we add that, you notice that because the overall color saturation was pretty dull, the information in the file just isn't quite there to push it. So we're not getting very much, even where there is color. All right. So this is one of those situations where you're going to really have to work harder in order to pull something out of this. All right. So let's try the adaptive color. All right. And you can see that it's going to take a bit because it's got it typically processes over the internet. But the one thing that's interesting is that unlike the Adobe Color, where this doom and gloom kind of gets brightened up a little bit, it doesn't really brighten it up. But what we do find is that we gain a little bit more contrast in our light tones. All right. These trees in the background are now a little bit more prevalent. And the snow in the foreground, we're actually seeing texture, where before that texture wasn't that noticeable. So let me take that back to, where was it? Landscape. Okay. Landscape, barely can see that texture down in here. All right. Where this ice is, yeah, just so you know what this scene is. This is a little estuary off the Houstonic River. So the river, just so you know, the river flows that way on the other side of this here. But there's a little bit of the river that comes in here and feeds a pond that's down kind of like behind me in this shot. All right. So all of this in the foreground here, this is ice on the water. And then this, of course, is snow. So as soon as we switch it over to adaptive color, you're going to notice that we gain a lot of texture in that snow, and look at all that texture in the ice. And of course we gain some contrast with those trees in the background. As a matter of fact, let's see, before, after. All right. So in this particular case, you know, you have to say, all right, what can I do in order to, what is it that I want to do with this particular image in order to bring out the detail? Now, if you recall, let me go back to the Adobe Color. All right. If you notice, I have three exposures: bright, kind of like our midtones, and our darks. All right, where this dark one's supposed to keep your highlights in control, and the light one is supposed to keep the shadows in control. But the reason I picked these three is not because they are great shots for HDR, because they are not. All right. The reason I picked these is because you can see very clearly that, actually, I should probably, let me put this one in front so they're in order. Here we go. You can see that this one is definitely light. This is mid-tone, or in the middle, and this is definitely dark. Okay. 3 different exposures. I'm now going to apply that adaptive color. All right. And if I bring it back, you'll notice that all 3 now look about the same. So this gives us a little bit of a clue as to what this adaptive color profile is actually doing to our files. Not only is it changing, it's not really just applying a color profile, but it's also doing a lot of heavy lifting as far as exposure balancing is concerned. And this is where it gets into a bit of a problem, because sometimes you will want to intentionally underexpose a frame in order to bring out a certain feature. All right. So what I found, especially with HDR photos, all right, so here's one of the Brooklyn Bridge, pretty much an iconic shot that if you've ever gone to Brooklyn or New York and gone over the Brooklyn Bridge, this is an iconic shot that pretty much everybody shoots at one angle or another. Okay. So what I did is I shot it in a bracket back in 2015. So my thought was that, just in case the software can't bring out the detail that I want, I'll be able to do it. Obviously, the software nowadays is a lot better, so we're able to really push files nowadays a lot better than we could have back, 10 years ago. All right. But what I want you to notice is if I take all of these, all right, and I say, all right, we're shooting them camera neutral. Let's go into our adaptive color. All right. When we go back, you'll notice that all 3 are almost identical. The light one, we don't have as much detail in the clouds as the middle one and the dark one do. Okay. And that's because those very light pixels are probably really pretty much close to the edge of my exposure, my dynamic range. Okay. Where the other ones were more within the dynamic range. Okay. So now I can say, all right, well, if these all 3 are now pretty much the same exposure, do I even need to do an HDR? Okay. And am I going to gain anything from doing an HDR? And now we look at it and says, oh, well, wait a minute. What happened here? All right. This is looking way too dark in comparison to what was fed into it. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel. Everybody see how dark this is, right? Okay, so let me cancel that out. I'm going to go back to the develop module. I'm going to come out of the adaptive color, and I'm just going to go to the um, uh, Adobe Color, regular, just the Adobe Color profile. All right, and you can see that we're back to our pretty much our original exposure. Now, if we do a photo merge HDR, look at that. Now we get something that looks more like what we would expect from, three exposures being blended together. Okay, we don't have any clipping in the highlights. We don't have any clipping in the shadow area. Okay, and obviously, like I said, nowadays the software being, better performing for low light situations, this probably doesn't need the HDR treatment, but I just wanted to show you how the adaptive color profile can really seriously mess up your edits if you do not apply it at the correct time. So what we're going to do is go ahead and say, go ahead and merge that. All right. More than likely, I can probably just work with this middle exposure and I will be fine. I wouldn't need to do a bracketed shot, but this is what we get. All right. It maintains the Adobe color because that's what our original 3 images had. All right. We had it in Adobe color. I exported it to HDR, and now I can go ahead and apply the adaptive color. And there's a slight shift. Our blue sky, we gained a little bit of contrast there. And so this is before, this is after, before, after. All right. So it's a little bit not blown out, but you can see this bright area right in here. You can barely make out the texture. And then, of course, this area, you're going to see a big jump. Again, the texture, there is texture there, but you're going to notice that it really jumps and it pulls out that texture in those areas a lot more. All right. And because the exposure was fairly much within the range of what would be normal for this scene, the adaptive color really didn't touch the exposure on this as much as what you saw it do with like that really dark image and that really light image from the previous example. Okay. So at this point, like I said, one of the benefits of utilizing the adaptive color profile is that now we have access to all our sliders in the tone and basically in the tone section of the basic module. All right. Whereas taking something like we'll use this one as an example. All right. Adobe color. All right, everything's zeroed out. If I wanted to, I would have to go and open up my shadows. Actually, let's go with the exposure first. All right, bring down the highlights a little bit. Maybe bring down the whites. Bring down the shadows in order to gain some of that really nice contrast detail. Okay, you notice that my sky, I would really have to, I don't know, really play around with the sliders in order to get any kind of detail in this section and in this section, all right, which I'm having a hard time. Maybe if I open up, oh, there we go. If I add a little bit of clarity and texture, I am now able to get some detail, some texture going on in those sections. But what happens is this part also gets a lot of texture, and now it's starting to look a little too crunchy. Okay, so let me go ahead and reset those tones. All right, but if we go to the Adobe Adaptive Color, all right, it balances everything out. I'm able to gain the I'm able to gain the texture here. I'm able to gain the texture there without gaining all that texture here. And we have all of these still in their default neutral position that I can then further modify if need be. All right. But what I'm finding is that you have to take this on an image by image basis, where previously I thought, well, I'll just apply to all my images and then take it from there. I'm now finding that might not be the best solution. Okay. All right. So that's kind of the warning I want to give you with these particular images, especially if you opt for doing HDR shots. Okay, here's another HDR shot. Let me put these in order. 1, 2, 3. All right. Oops. Let me pull that out of there. Okay. Expose for the shadows. This is my neutral, and expose for the highlights. Okay. Everybody know how to set your exposure for bracketed high HDR shots?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
No,
No? Who?
that's just me. I'm way behind on my
Okay.
camera.
All right. So very quickly, without going into too much, all right. This first image is overexposed. All right. So it's plus on my exposure. And what I'm looking for is where my shadows sit. All right. I don't want my shadows to be overly dark or overly bright. Okay. I want my shadows to be under control. Okay. The next exposure you want to look for is your underexposure. All right. And this is for the brightest areas. So if we look at the sky, I have detail in my sky. I can see all the detail of the clouds. It's very overcast, but it's not a blanket of this monotone gray, light gray, as in the first exposure. Okay. Even the second exposure, we're pretty decent. All right. But what I'm looking for is that nice contrast control of the sky or the bright areas. All right. I don't want any clipping. Okay. And it just so happens that we pick up a little bit of the reflection in the water. All right. Once I have my overexposure and my underexposure, then what I do is I calculate where that is along my exposure range, and I'll find the center. I'll set my exposure to that center, and I'll say, well, this is 1, 2 exposure difference. All right. So if from here to here is like a 4-stop difference, The center, it puts me 2 stops and 2 stops. That'll be my exposure that I set to. I then go to my bracket settings. I go out 2, and I take the 3 shots. All right. If, let's say, this between this first shot and this, the overshot and the undershot, if that's only 3 exposures, then I know I have to be, because we can only do third stops. Okay, I would have to say, all right, what is my midpoint here? Well, it would be 1.5. Well, I can't do halves. I can either do 1/3 or 2/3. So I'm going to go to the higher of the two. So I'll go 1 2/3. Okay, I'll set that as my base exposure, and then I'll go 1 2/3, 1 2/3 in either direction. So now that will be 3 1/3, 3 2/3, yeah, 3 1/3 stop difference. All right, between the first and last, and that's my exposure bracket. Okay, so that's just a quick lesson, you know, in getting your your brackets. All right, but now, of course, if we look at all these 3, I know that with the software that I have available now, I can probably pull everything I need from this middle exposure, and I'll prove that in a second. But what I'm going to do is, if we keep it in that camera neutral, all right, and if I do a HDR photo merge, crank away, give me my preview. All right, you can see that that's a pretty nasty HDR. All right,
Ew.
yeah, all right. However, my darks, they're a little bit darker than I would like. Okay, but what it's doing is it's preserving the sky, and I do have some leeway in the shadow area to be able to adjust. Okay, now the one thing I didn't mention previously is that one of the settings that I normally have put on is this auto settings. Auto settings. All right, so if I click on auto settings, now we have something closer to what I should have. All right, so what it's doing at this point is it's saying, all right, I've blended the 3 exposures, all right, to the best of my ability. Obviously, the HDR program in Lightroom is not the most robust. You have a little bit of control over it, not a lot. But it's supposed to kind of render something that looks relatively natural, not this overcooked HDR that used to be very popular, 10 years ago when HDR really started taking off. All right, so now it's applied some settings. It has given me a starting point to continue my edit. So I'm going to say, go ahead and merge that. It's going to run the process. You'll see that the taskbar up in the upper left-hand corner is going through. And then it's going to spit out my, where to go? Oh, here it is. Okay. spit out my HDR image, okay? And what I want you to notice is that it applied a bunch of edits to the image for me, all right? So this is based on trying to get that image pretty much to that 18% exposure range that most camera meters are calibrated to, okay? And then from here, if I wanted to, you know, I can go ahead and move my sliders as needed. Maybe add a little bit of dehaze. See if we can bring that sky in, okay? So I can further develop this, okay? But if I were to take this one here, this one here. No, maybe not. No, this one here. This is the middle exposure. Okay. If I change it to Adobe Landscape, you're going to notice that it brightens up a little bit. It gives a little bit more vibrancy to that green. Okay, because remember, the landscape color profile is supposed to boost colors that are normally found in nature shots. Okay, and that would be your greens, your browns, your blues. Okay, and then from here I would, you know, maybe open up my shadows. All right, yeah, probably not anything in the blacks. Okay, maybe boost the contrast a little bit. Okay, third of a stop. All right, and I'm able to get a really good file from this. You're probably not picking up a lot of the detail in the sky because of the video compression, but it's there. All right, I'm seeing some, and if I wanted to, I could really probably push that a little bit more. There we go. All right, so now if we compare that to our HDR, all right, the HDR is a little bit brighter. Let me see if I can take, oops. Let me see if I can take this. Come on. This, make that a little bit brighter. All right. See, I'm now needing to kind of really start pushing some of these sliders to extreme ends. All right. So let's take those two, do a side-by-side comparison. All right. Here's my HDR. All right. So this is HDR. All right. And this is my normal exposure with the shadows pushed. Okay.
But your normal exposure does not have all three photographs in it, correct?
The normal exposure has just that one exposure. The HDR is a combination of those three. Okay. So the HDR is taking that sky and kind of blending it in with a little bit more of that middle part of the land. Okay. Now, we can see a little bit of a slight difference between these two. All right. Most of it is going to be in the micro contrast between the shadows and the midtones. All right. But the one thing that you're going to really, really notice, all right, and let me go and zoom in. All right. What I want you to notice is right along that ridge line where the sky and the ground meet. Okay. This is the HDR. All right. And you're going to notice there's a little bit of haloing. All right. And if I push that a little bit too much, okay, that haloing becomes a little bit more noticeable. All right. Actually, you can probably see it right along here. You can see that haloing, and so you'll see the haloing because there's going to be a brightening of the sky, and if we notice, like especially right there, there's going to be a darkening, and you can see right along there, that little edge of the tree line is darkened a little bit. All right. So in this particular case, it's not too bad. Okay. I've seen worse. I have seen worse in some HDR shots. So that's something you need to watch out for. But as I said, one of the nice things about the software nowadays is that it's able to push and pull extreme white or extreme brights and extreme shadows and be able to manipulate it to the point where it becomes usable. All right. All right. So this is Adobe Landscape. Okay. Now, Adobe Landscape, as you recall, this is our before shot. This is what we did after we pushed and pulled all those sliders. Okay. So this is before, this is after. Remember that, before and after. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset to the before, and I'm going to change this to adaptive color. Okay. And now you can see that we've gained a lot more information specifically in that shadow area of the image. Okay. And let's see, before, after. So you can see we've gained a lot. And the benefit of this, again, is that we've gained a little bit of exposure in those shadow tones, but we've also gained the ability to manipulate our sliders to further enhance what the color profile did. Okay. And the benefit of this is that because it's not an HDR blend, we're not going to have a problem with haloing along that ridge line like we did with the HDR. Okay. If we use masks, then that may introduce some of that haloing. You have to be careful. All right. But what this does is it gets us so much better results that we are now able to maybe just gain a little bit. I mean, look at this. Just to kind of bring down the highlights, I only had to bring it down just a tiny little bit in relation to what we did previously, where it was almost maxed out. Okay, it was almost maxed out. And then we can open up our shadows, you know, maybe even add a little bit of whites. Okay. Pushing the contrast really doesn't do very much. So, okay, yeah, I'm not liking the contrast. All right, so maybe just dropping the blacks. There we go. That gets us there. Okay.
Hey, Doug?
Yeah.
While you were doing that, I took some landscape photos yesterday, and I was editing them before we started. So I just tried adaptive color on one, and I didn't like it at all. It made the sky, number one, it made the sky white.
Okay.
So what's the advantage of using adaptive color?
Uh, what was your sky like previously?
Hold on one second.
Let me see if I can find something with.
Okay, let me see if I can come back to, let me come back to the beginning. Import, there we are.
All right.
So, in
Okay.
the
So,
beginning,
all right.
let me just tell you 1 second what happened. So
Uh,
here I am at the beginning,
let,
and
let, let me ask you one question. All
yes.
right. When you changed your color profile to the adaptive color, had you already started editing it?
I did, and then I changed everything back to plain nothing.
All right. So
So
you reset everything.
I reset everything. So
Okay.
I'm at the point where I imported. So now I'm going to go from Adobe Color to Adaptive. Let me see what happens here. And it just, oh, okay, didn't make it all white this time. Okay.
All right. Yeah. So here's one thing that I did find out that it took me by surprise the first time I encountered it. And it took me a second to figure out what the heck went wrong. And I think what I experienced is the same thing that you experienced. Okay.
Okay.
I took an image that I had already edited. I applied the color, the adaptive color profile, and certain parts blew out.
Okay.
Okay. And that's because it did not change my edit to compensate for what the adaptive color does. So if the
Okay.
adaptive color brightens some things, it's going to brighten it in addition to whatever brightening you've already applied to it.
Okay.
All
This
right.
time I went back to square one and it didn't blow it out like it did before. Okay.
So
I still,
yes,
still,
I did find that to be a problem.
I still prefer using using Adobe Landscape
Yep.
than using adaptive color. I think it puts me in a different, it puts me in a better position to edit the way I want to edit.
Okay.
Unless I'm missing something. Am I missing something? Or
No, like I said, there are situations where the adaptive color is not going to work. All right. And let me go back to here. Oh, today's class. All right. And all right, this image here. Okay. I happened to come across this little guy just kind of chilling, and I took this shot, and I tried to position myself in at a better angle because there's some distractions here, and then he wasn't feeling it and kind of took off. But here it is, camera neutral. All right, which, like I said, was my default way of bringing things in. All right, now I would go to, all right, let's try adaptive color. All right, and you can see
okay.
with this adaptive color that it kind of compressed everything towards the center. It definitely took all those highlights and toned them down quite a bit. Okay. And then when I tried it with Adobe Landscape, okay, the Adobe Landscape again brightens up or gives you a little bit more color saturation and the greens and browns and yellows and things. All right. So you can see that here, this is before, this is after. You can see how those green tones really come to life. All right. This is kind of dull and boring And then this, all right, you might argue they might be a little bit too bright. Okay, in that case, we can probably go to like Adobe Color, right? So Adobe Color, brightens it up a little bit. Okay, where Adobe Landscape gives us, definitely gives a little bit more warmth to the sticks as well. All right, and of course, Adobe Portrait would never recommend it for nature shot because Adobe Portrait tends to reduce the reds. All right, and you can see how it made those branches laying on the ground kind of look lifeless. The dead leaves in the underbrush is kind of lifeless. All right, so Adobe Portrait not suitable for this. Okay, Adobe Neutral definitely not. Look how gray this looks. All right. So for me, it would be either landscape or Adobe Color, depending on how intense you wanted those colors to be. And this is one of those things that is salt and pepper to taste. However, if I do the adaptive color, I'm not quite feeling this at all. All right. Is it usable? Absolutely, it's a usable image. I can probably do a lot with this, but it doesn't have that oomph. It doesn't have that life to it that the Adobe Color and the Adobe Landscape have. All right.
Also today, the pictures that I took, it was in a marsh area. And of course, it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Plus it was in March 2nd when there's no green. There's no green there. There's no green, no leaves. So
Yeah. So your best bet is to just, one of the things that you can do if you open up here, let me back this up. Okay. Where it says profile, if you go all the way to the right hand side, you're going to see this little grid.
yes.
Okay. Or
Mhm.
if you click on this, all right, you can also click on where it says browse. They both
Mhm.
take you to the same place. All right. They're both
Yes.
the browser. All right. This will give you all the color profiles that are loaded onto your system. Okay. And of course, the two newest ones is the adaptive, which you can see are right here, adaptive. Okay.
Mhm.
So the nice thing about the browser is that you can just hover and it's going to give you a preview of what the effect is of those profiles. All right. Now, one thing that I would suggest is do this at the very, very beginning of your workflow. All right. Before you've done anything to these sliders here. All right. As a matter of fact, the only thing that I have done to this particular image is that I've applied my lens correction. All right, that's the remove chromatic aberrations and the enable the lens profile. All right, according to you know the EXIF information. Okay, that's the only thing other than obviously when I imported it, it put me in the Adobe Neutral. Okay, so everything is pretty much by default, uh, just with the camera profile and the Adobe Neutral. So now I can just come here, open up the browser, okay, and you can either show it by the grid or by a list, okay, or by a large grid, okay. So what happens is, here it is, all right, you see that it gives you a very large preview, whereas grid kind of puts it into these one by one blocks, okay? Or you can do a list, all right, which doesn't have a preview, but because when you hover over that list, it shows you what it's doing to your image. Do you really need those grid previews? You can argue for yes or no, all right? So you can go through and you can hover. Oh, I don't want the black and white. Let's go to no, not camera. Let's go to the Adobe Raw. Here's the Adobe Color, monochrome, landscape. All right, so neutral, standard. Oh, Adobe Vivid. Okay. Now, as you go through these, all right, over time, the more you use this particular tool, you're going to find that certain profiles attract your eye more so than others. All right. You're drawn to certain profiles because they appeal to you on an emotional level. And at that point, what I would suggest is the ones that you keep going to, add them to your favorites, because what that's going to make them happen is it's going to make it available from that little drop down before you even get to this preview list. All right. And you can see right here, these little stars. All right. Everything that is starred is in my favorites. And all you got to do is just hover over the blank area and click on it. And it's going to add it to your favorite. Or you can just, click on it. And what was it? There was another place where you could add to it. I can't remember where it is now. All right, but anyway, if you click on that little spot, you can add it to your favorite, and what that's going to do is it's going to make it available from this drop down. Okay, and if you, as you go along, you say, you know what, I don't really use this one all that much. I don't use this one all that much, maybe the standard, you can take it out, okay? All right, and then there are, of course, others that are loaded in here, and then all you got to do is just, oh, that Modern 3 looks pretty good. Oh, that kind of gives it a washed out, kind of old school film look. Here's another old school film look. All right. So just hovering over all those will give you the preview. You select it and you go ahead and close it out and you're back. Okay. But this allows you to really preview it very quickly just by hovering over. See, standard, vivid, landscape, vivid, landscape, vivid, landscape. Oh, I kind of like the vivid. I'm going to go ahead and select vivid. Okay. And now we've taken one step closer to getting it to look the way you want while still having all those sliders available. Okay? All right.
Thank you, Doc.
Okay, I'm going to add a little wrench into this. All right. Something that a lot of people don't consider at the very beginning of their workflow. And if we look at our side panel, all right, you're going to notice that all the way at the bottom of that list is one called calibration. And I've talked about calibration here because it allows you to manipulate the color channels independently. All right. Now, You might be familiar with like the basic, all right, you can kind of sort of manipulate colors using the white balance. You can make things a little bit cooler. Obviously, you can go, way too much. You can warm it up, okay? You can also add green or magenta, all right? And these are used to kind of color correct your initial capture to give you a more neutral color balance, to basically control your white balance. And what this does, in theory, the way it's designed, it's designed to work is when there is a color cast, all right? So for example, in this particular image, it was taken in the woods. Natural sunlight is being filtered through trees. So everything tends to have a green cast to it. All right. So we have the warmth of the sun. All right. Again, depending on how high or how low the sun is in our atmosphere. The higher the sun, obviously, the closer to the natural white balance that we consider white as the 5500K or 55K color balance, all right? But because it's being filtered through a lot of the greenery, all right, we may need to compensate for that green by adding a little bit of magenta, all right, maybe taking it a little bit into the bluer color space, okay? So this white balance, while it manipulates colors, it manipulates it for a very specific purpose. Not very artistic in the normal sense of artistic color manipulation. Can it be used to artistically manipulate colors? Yes, I do it all the time, especially when I'm doing like a day to night conversion that we did recently, where I pushed the color balance well into the cool tones, all right, to give it the illusion of night, all right. But when we're looking to create something that's more natural, as in this scene, there's only so much we can manipulate the colors with the white balance, all right? However, if we come all the way to the, well, no, we can do localized adjustments, okay? We can target very specific colors and we can manipulate either the hue, the saturation, or the luminosity, all right? This gives you the ability to fine-tune certain colors, okay? But you'll notice that these are very, very targeted, all right? And you have to be very selective of how you manipulate these. And you have to kind of bounce around between the hue, saturation, and lightness in order to get the look you want. It has its purpose, but I would suggest before we even get to either one of those two, come all the way down to the bottom to the calibration. And what I find is that manipulating the saturation of one of these or multiple of these channels really can enhance your image. The two channels that I find really, really work the best is the blue channel and the red channel. The blue channel it really just makes the image, certain aspects of it pop. And what I'm doing is I'm manipulating the saturation levels of these sliders. I'm not really manipulating the hues, All right. I'm manipulating the saturation. Right. And you notice if I bring the blue saturation down, it looks very grayed out. Okay. But if I bring up the blue, all right, you notice that we're starting to get some liveliness going here. All right. And the same thing with the red. All right. Obviously, if we push all of these saturations down, we're going to get a black and white. Okay. So obviously, we're not going to want to push them, all the way down to 0 or I'm sorry, negative 100. Okay. That defeats the purpose of color manipulation. All right. But what we can do is, and you can see if we manipulate the saturation of the green, all right, when we switched over to that vivid or to that landscape, it's already boosting our green colors. So manipulating the green primary just kind of takes it from that, ooh, it's boosted now to the, it's going beyond boosted to becoming oversaturated. Okay. So that's the green channel for it. It's one of those channels that very, very seldom works getting manipulated. I find that the red and the blue channels are the ones that can really, really boost your image. Okay. And I find that the blue above all is the one that I tend to lean towards first. Okay. So there's after, before, after, before, after. You can see that there's a bit of a warmth there without really adding a lot of warmth into the shadow area as well. Okay. So I would put that towards the beginning of your workflow. All right. Now, to that effect,
Doug,
yeah.
one quick question. I do that a lot with the colors, like what you showed before.
Yeah.
I'll like say the sky, I will maybe increase the saturation, and I will change the hue because sometimes I prefer the sky a certain way.
Okay. All right.
What is the difference between that and my way? Between calibration and using the colors manipulation up above.
Okay. So by manipulating the blue, for example, in the color mixer,
Yeah.
by manipulating the blue, all right. Trick question. Does your camera take color pictures or black and white pictures? Remember this one?
Yeah, but they take black and white pictures.
They take 3 black and whites.
Yes.
One with a blue filter, one with a red filter, and one with a green filter.
Yes.
Okay. So the mix of these 3 will give you the different colors. All right. So the mix of these 3 is going to, in a very specific area, is going to give you a blue sky. Right?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
So now,
Yes.
when we look at this color mixer and we say, okay, here's our blue slider, I'm going to take that blue slider. What it's targeting is just the area of those 3 black and whites that when combined creates the color blue. So it's a very short, out of the 256 range of black and gray, it says, okay, this set of numbers in the green channel, this set of numbers in the blue channel, and this set of numbers in the red channel, these in combination will give us a range that we call blue.
Okay.
And that's the only thing I'm going to manipulate. Everything else outside of that range, I don't touch. Okay. The calibration says, okay, I have 3 channels, red, green, and blue. I'm going to take this one and only this channel I am going to manipulate, but it's going to manipulate the entire range
Okay,
and shift it as needed. All
okay,
right, so that's the difference.
thank
All
you.
right, so that blue channel influences the colors when it mixes in with the reds and the greens. So what you'll notice is, all right, like for example, here is my, actually, let me reset this. And let me go down to the calibration. I'm going to reset all of these. Okay, those are all reset.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go to my color mixer, and let's say we want to manipulate the green here. Okay,
Mhm.
I can make it a lot duller or a lot more vivid, okay,
Okay.
more saturated. All right, to begin with. All right, and here's the other thing. To begin with, there are some areas of green within this image that, because we applied this Adobe Vivid, all right, Adobe Vivid color profile adds saturation to very specific colors. All right, so we're already taking colors and we're pushing the saturation. All right,
Mhm.
so on top of that, what we're looking to do with the color mixer is we're going to take that green and we're going to add more saturation. Well, there's only so much saturation that a color can take before it's maxed out. All right, just like
Mhm.
exposure. All right, once the exposure goes to extreme end, it can't get brighter than bright, and it can't get darker than black. All right, can't get brighter than white, can't get darker than black. Once it's maxed out, it's maxed out. And it's the same thing with color saturation. Once it's maxed out, it is maxed out. So you can see that as I take that green, all right, I'm getting a little bit, but not a lot. But if I go the other way, all right, we are desaturating it, all right? But you notice that even maxed out, it's not desaturating to gray, all right? It's not turning into black and white, okay? It's
Mhm.
getting duller, yes, but we're not killing the saturation 100%, okay? The other thing is green is a combination of, well, no, not a combination of, but green affects its neighbors, and its neighbors influence the color green, and its neighbors are yellow and cyan. All right. So if I were to pull up a color wheel, all right,
Mhm.
and we look at the green, okay, you see the adjacent colors are yellow and cyan. So every time we shift that saturation of green one way or the other, all right, we're either going to add yellow or we're going to add cyan to the mix, right? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So now, if you notice, if I go to the right, we're adding yellow, all right? And it's even, I mean, if you look at the slider, that little line is awfully thin, but you can see that to one side, uh, well, to one side it's a bright green, to the other side it's a dull green, all right. But what you're not seeing is that it's shifting into it's into adjacent colors, all right.
Mhm.
But if we look at the hue, if we go to the hue slider, now if we look at the green, you notice that here we are taking it and we're definitely adding yellow. And if we go to the other side, we're definitely adding cyan. All right. This obviously targets the color, while the saturation targets the intensity of the color. All right. But you can notice that as we reduce the intensity of the green, it's allowing the underlying colors to come through a little bit more. And that would be, in this case, here, it's that cyan color. Okay. And if we push it too much, what we're doing is we're getting away from the cyan and it's leaning more into the yellow. So we're picking up a little bit more yellow. All right. But we're only targeting that sliver that Lightroom considers to be green. Okay. Now, if we go to the calibration, all right, and I take that green slider, the green primary, and if I move it down to desaturate, okay, what you're going to see is that everything that's green, all right, is being shifted, okay, but everything that's red and everything that is blue is also shifting. Okay.
Okay.
Because what it's doing now is, by the default, all right, green is what RGB? Let's see. Green is let's just say 255 yellow, 255 red, and 0 blue, I believe, if I'm correct, if memory serves me. All right. So now what we're doing is, if we are manipulating that green channel, we're saying, okay, what used to be 255 in the green channel, all right, which, if you recall, with the color wheel, all right, the green channel, all right, is, let's see, RGB, so red, green, and blue, okay. The mix of red and green gives you that yellowy green color, okay, and the mix of green and blue gives you that more of a bluish green color, okay. As we start desaturating the green channel, we are pushing the colors more and more towards that red and blue and getting away from that green color, all right. And it's just altering that color mix between the red, the green, and the blue channel, all right. And obviously, if we take away color, well, we're just robbing color from all the channels, all right. What I find is that when we start going and adding saturation to the green channel, it's also going to boost by default, because even though we're listing it RGB, all right, if we're looking at the green channel, you know, its neighbor is red and blue, okay, but even though we have blue at the bottom, its neighbor is green and red, okay. So even though on the list it's R at the top, G in the middle, blue at the bottom, blue, even though it's excuse me, even though it's at the bottom, its neighbor is red, okay, because it would just continue.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So if you notice, there we go. All right. As we're adding saturation to the green, we're seeing that yellow start to come out, okay. And we're seeing there's not a lot of red in here, but we're seeing the orange area is starting to turn a little bit more magenta-ish. The spots here,
Okay.
all right, are starting to turn a little bit more red, all right, because it's pushing the saturation into green. It's also pushing the saturation little less so in its neighbors. Again, that's slinky effect. Little less so in its neighbors, but it's still pushing it. So it's going to affect globally, all right, because this is a global effect. It's going to affect the color channels globally across all 3 channels, even though we're manipulating one. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, actually, let me get rid of that color wheel so you can see what I'm talking about. Actually, let me push that all the way. Look how it brightened up that red. And I did not touch the red, all right? But because by pushing the saturation on the green, we are changing the color mix on its neighbors, all right? And you can see even in the leaves, you can see how the leaves get more yellow added to it.
Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. That was a good question. All right. So and your workflow, what I would suggest is start off with your color profile. It's going to give you a big jump towards the way you want your image to look, and then jump all the way down to the bottom to the calibration and just play around. Just move those sliders back and forth. It doesn't always benefit your image, but sometimes it really, really does in unexpected ways. Okay. All right. To that effect, if you right click anywhere on any of these panels, you're going to see the context menu comes up with customize develop panel. All right. And what you can do is you can take your calibration and move it to the top. All right. And you can reorder these any way you want. I would suggest reorder them in the way that your workflow feels natural to you. Okay. So, you might say, well, I usually do my color mixer and color grading before I do tone. Or you can say, I'm going to group these by, color first, then texture, then, exposure, however, all right? And then when you hit save, you're going to get this little pop-up that in order for those changes to take an effect, you need to relaunch Lightroom, okay? So obviously I'm not going to relaunch now, I'm going to relaunch it later. But next time you see this, next time you see my Lightroom, you're going to notice that calibration is now at the top. Okay? It's going to be right underneath my basic panel. Okay?
Good.
All right. Any questions about color manipulation, working with color profiles, specifically the new adaptive color? Any questions? All right. All right. Here's another one. Camera neutral. All right. And we can say, okay, well, let's see what's going to look best. Adobe Color, Adobe Landscape, a little bit more vibrance, or Adaptive Color. Oh, I kind of look, let's see, Color, Adaptive Color, Landscape. All right. So what I'm looking at here, all right, and this is maybe a good way for you to think about when you should use the new adaptive color. Okay. Not so much for the color space that it allows you to work in, but understanding that it also manipulates your exposure. Maybe take that into consideration, see what it does to your highlights and your shadows. All right. So here we have the feathers on the top of the wings. They're pretty blown out. Okay. So if we go camera neutral, okay, we're not quite completely blown. Well, yeah, we are. We are pretty blown out there, because if I bring my highlight clipping indicators, you can see right there I'm pretty blown out. Okay, and if we activate our shadows, no, I'm not getting any clipping on my shadows. All right, so we're definitely getting clipping in the highlights, but because this is a raw image, I know that there is a little bit of leeway beyond what this is showing me. All right. Not a lot of leeway, a little bit of leeway. All right. So if I go to Adobe Color, okay, I'm not gaining anything there. Adobe Landscape. Oh, there we go. Adobe Landscape. Look at the difference. I've gained detail in that upper part of my the wing of the bird. All right, and then if we go to adaptive color, okay, I gained a lot, but not as much as that landscape. All right, neutral, portrait, standard, vivid. All right. So in this case, well, it's minor. It's a toss up between Adobe Color and Adobe Landscape. I'm looking at the color of the beak. I'm not seeing much difference between the two. All right. We can look at the shadow area, because remember, adaptive color also targets our shadow area. That or landscape, I'm not seeing a big difference. All right. So at this point, I would probably choose landscape, because that makes better sense for me in regards to the shoulder of the bird. Okay. So being able to preview it like this will hopefully help you make a decision. Okay. So for you nature photographers, this may be the key point. All right. Okay. Once we're there, we can then, target our highlights, maybe even our whites a little bit. And now we're gaining some detail in there. Open up my shadows, little contrast, little texture. All right. Actually, no, let me reduce the texture. I don't want to add texture globally. I think what I'm going to do is create a radial gradient. Let me turn that just to kind of cover the bird a little bit. And I will add my texture there. Yeah, because I just want to target him. All right. It spills out a little bit outside, but it's, that background is soft enough. I could care less. Okay. And there we go. Maybe even add a little bit, oops, let me select it. Open up. No, not the highlights. Open up the shadows a little bit. Maybe bring my blacks down. A little contrast. There we go. Add another one. Let's see, maybe add one. Oh, sorry. Add here. Select subject. Let's see how good it does. Letter O for my overlay. Oh, it picked up something here. Yeah. Not a deal breaker. Let's bring up the exposure a little bit. Bring down the blacks. Or no, bring down the blacks. bring up my exposure because I want to. All right, as I bring up my exposure, you notice I'm bringing down my blacks because I want to maintain the contrast. All right, because the exposure is going to take that whole thing and it's just going to shift it. Okay, and I don't want it to shift too bright in the shadow area. Right now, you're saying, well, what shadow area? Well, the micro shadows that are created by the feathers, for one. All right. So see how flat that looks? As soon as I bring the blacks down, the blacks are far enough from the whites that it's not going to affect the light area. All right. And it's also far enough from my exposure range that it's not going to negate everything that I've added in my exposure. Okay. It just gives me that nice little micro contrast. All right, because if I push the contrast, look what it does to my shadows. It just kind of, darkens the shadows. I don't want to darken the shadows. I just want to add contrast. Okay? Hopefully that made sense to you guys.
Yes.
And voila. Okay. And if I wanted to, I might even just add one more, maybe a linear gradient, and take the exposure down just a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. And now all our attention goes to there. And if we want to be creative, we can put a text block here and write out a poem about a bird.
By the way, I did not know my microphone was on when I made that comment about when you did the merge of the HDR photo.
It's all right.
Did not. I was like,
It's all right. It works.
okay.
Hey, if it's a concern, it needs to be addressed, right?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Any questions on the new adaptive color? How it does have its flaws, and it's not for every single image. You have to be very selective. Okay.
No questions, but it's certainly, there's a lot to just, I worked with it all last week since last time, or 2 weeks now. And I'm really liking it, but you're right. It is not for every photo, but it certainly does enhance the majority of them. With the work I was doing with. I did a shoot with a Renaissance fair here in South Florida. It was a lot of headshots, and it really worked out great. But when you put a lot of people together, then it did not work out as well. But if you just get one person, it really worked out fantastic.
And I'm sure the tool will get better over time, because you have to understand that Adobe's putting a lot of effort into the artificial intelligence, and that adaptive color is using artificial intelligence to take a look at your image, compare it to its database, its learning set, making the appropriate changes according to how it perceives those changes need to be made. But as you know, it's not quite there. Will it get better? Absolutely, I'm sure it will. All right. But here's another example. This little squirrel, very gray day, very monochromatic looking.
Can you hit automatic to see what happens? Auto?
Oh, the auto.
Yeah, I got a bad message when I did that.
Okay. You cannot use the auto function with the adaptive color at the same time. They don't work well. All right.
That's a good tip.
Yeah, because and I'm glad you mentioned it. Simply because the adaptive color is not just, even though it's called adaptive color, it's also targeting the exposures of your image and balancing them out. So it goes beyond color. All right. And the auto feature is an auto exposure analysis. It analyzes the images. It says, okay, well, these shadow areas are too dark. Let me open those up. These bright areas are too bright. Let me darken those down. Balance it out, getting the image to be more of that 18%, exposure, proper exposure, or what it considers to be proper exposure, and sets it to that. Okay. Everything that's happening here, all right, is also happening to a certain extent behind the scenes with that adaptive color. All right. So here we are. We're in Adobe Neutral. We go to Adobe Landscape. We get some nice saturation to the colors. The colors are starting to pop. Okay. But you can see we have to bring those sliders, the highlights and my shadows are not quite maxed out, but they're pushed. If we look at them, they're quite pushed. Okay. If I go to adaptive color, okay, I don't recommend doing it unless you've zeroed these out, because if I do my adaptive color, it's going to apply that adaptive color, but it's also going to keep all these settings. Now, in this case, it didn't do too drastic a change, but I did get, down here, you can see I'm getting a lot of clipping. All right. So if I were to reset all my tones, okay, you can see that the adaptive color and the adaptive landscape, all right, adaptive color really gives me a little bit more pop in the shadows, where landscape, it's a little bit darker. Doesn't do anything with the shadows. All right, so adaptive color. Now, if I click on auto, it's going to say, hey, look, for best results, avoid using the two together. It doesn't like it. All right, you can continue. All right, but it really just maybe just pushes it a little bit too far. Okay. All right. That's pretty much it for today.
That's quite a bit there.
A lot for you to chew on.
Yes. Oh, now your lighting is okay. Your lighting was good when you were closer to the camera, and now that you moved back, you're lighter. Okay, that's good color, and that's different color. You're very light
Yeah,
there.
it's the camera does some weird self-adjusting.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Mhm.
But again, when I look at my preview, the preview looked great
Yes.
on my OBS. So
It looks great. It works.
yep. Anyway,
Overall, the picture is cleaner. Your picture is cleaner.
good. That's what
Your
I wanted
your
with this
video
new
is
setup.
cleaner.
Yeah. And eventually I'll probably pick up a better camera. Maybe I know it's a big hassle, but maybe I'll put my 40D to work as my main webcam. But that means
40D, the 40D was a good camera.
it was for
Yes.
its time,
Yes, it was.
Compared to the cameras now, it sucks.
Oh yeah. I mean, way back when I liked it.
Yeah. So, all right. Any last minute questions? Anybody got a question on anything other than what we covered?
No.
No, we're good. All right. Warm weather's getting here. All right.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. We will have some outings. I want to do some outings this year.
By the way, I intend to, be up at 20 of 3 on the 14th of March.
For what?
The blood moon
Oh, okay.
eclipse. I
Yeah,
intend
you
to be
won't
up.
find me up that early. The blood moon
Okay.
doesn't interest me that much.
Okay, we have one person, and you know Helen in North Haven Camera Club.
Okay.
She's going to be up too.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm sure if you post it out there, somebody will join you.
yes.
So,
Well, okay. This is an open invitation to everybody. If you want to meet me at let's say 2:15 in the morning at Norton Park in Plainville, I will be there.
okay.
All right.
Did you do your research as to where to
Not yet.
stand in order to get a good foreground to your moon? Or are you just taking the moon with nothing in the
I'm
foreground?
just taking the moon without any. Well, all I have is I have a crop sensor with the 300 millimeters, so I'm sort of limited.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, the way you move your eyes is like you make it sound as if I could do something with
Of
that.
course you can.
Okay, but the moon's going to be far away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You got a 300 millimeter lens.
Yes.
All right. You
Mhm.
put something in the foreground as the
Okay.
moon is coming up.
All
All right.
right.
Then you get all that nice silhouette. Just make sure that it's a
Mhm.
strong silhouette.
Mhm.
Okay. And as the moon starts coming up, you get,
Yeah.
you know, the nice moon.
Mhm.
All right. And you have a landscape with the moon.
Okay. I'll try it.
All right. Photo ephemeris. All right. We'll let you know in what direction the moon is going to rise, and you can pinpoint yourself on a map. Do a little bit of research. You know, so if you got that particular park in mind,
Yes.
all right, look around the area, see exactly where you can stand. Maybe put a hill in front of you, or the silhouette of a tree. You know, shoot the moon through the trees as it's coming up.
Okay.
You know, you're gonna have
Mhm.
time. All right, you
Yeah.
know, you're gonna have
Mhm.
you know, a good length of time, so
Mhm.
you can take photos all the way up until the moon is up in the sky by itself. So
Mhm.
you know, it's going to give you plenty of opportunity to experiment, shoot through trees, put a building in front. Who knows? You know,
Mhm.
uh, do multiple exposures, so that way you know you can get a little bit of detail in the foreground.
Mhm.
Okay, get a super powerful flashlight. All right, to
Mhm.
illuminate a tree in the foreground.
Mhm. Okay.
All right,
Okay.
so
Mhm.
there's all kinds of options.
Yes.
All right, okay, guys. We'll see you next week. Spread the word, and I'm thinking maybe I'll do something in the studio area. I got some
Okay.
things that I'm prepping. So
Okay.
okay. All right, guys. Stay safe.
Have a good one.
See you next week. Good night,
Okay.
everybody.
All right.
All
Good
right.
night, everybody.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.